So should I use the pronouns that my child has shared with me or the pronouns that we've used since they were born? Hi, my name is Wes Ellis. I'm pastor at First Congregational Church in Ramona, and this is a question that comes up a lot, especially among parents or people who know some parents who have transgender children or children who are exploring their gender identity and are considering using different pronouns, preferred pronouns, however you want to say it, that are different than the ones that they've been using since birth. And this can be a really challenging and difficult conversation, especially in how that conversation goes and is received. And so much of it has to do with the world we live in and the kind of cultural stigma around this. Now, a lot of the decided stubbornness or resistance to changing the pronouns or using stated pronouns or correct pronouns comes from people's sense of certainty about the relationship between sex and gender. For a lot of people, those two things are supposed to be synonymous. Gender is determined by sex. We call this biological determinism, that someone's biology determines their identity. Now, we know that's not really the case in a lot of other situations, but in sex and gender, I think it's important to differentiate those two things. Sex is not the same as gender, and it's probably not as simple as we think. To put it as simply as I can, I think sex describes bodies, and gender describes the social and relational meaning that we give to those bodies. In other words, they're related, sex and gender, of course, much like race and ethnicity. But just as race kind of gives meaning to ethnicity in a cultural setting, same goes for gender. Gender gives meaning to sex in a cultural setting. So uh, gender is very much socially constructed, and it's related to sex. And it's important to know too, sex itself is not necessarily a binary. There are all kinds of complicated conversations around the genes and things that go into that. So talk to a scientist about that. But as a theologian, what I want to focus on is that second part, that gender part, because social and relational meaning is a very important topic for theological Christian discussion and thinking. Theologically, the social and relational meaning is always governed by love. That is a core value for Christian theology and for the church. That whatever meaning we give to bodies, to people, to race, to gender, is always governed by love and acceptance. And we've seen how radically and dramatically the church has failed on this in many times in history. I mean, just look at our history with slavery in the United States. That was something people supported with kind of common sense theological argumentation from Bible verses and everything. Not too different than the gender and sexuality conversation. People have scripture that wants to back up what they're saying. And of course, those scriptures are a lot more complicated than most people think. Uh, Consider this, if nothing else is helpful. About 48.8% of transgender youth have considered suicide, have experienced suicidal ideation. 48%, that's a coin toss. That's a half of them. And 26% roughly, and of course statistics are unreliable sometimes, but these are as close as I can get. 26% have actually attempted suicide. 26%. That's one in four. More than one in four transgender children, youth have attempted suicide. That is about 7 times more likely than their cisgender peers. That is something that we Christians should be very careful about and very concerned about. We are talking about one of the most vulnerable populations in our world, a very small population, by the way, of the larger population, but a very vulnerable one. And so, therefore, as Christians who follow a crucified Messiah who identified with the least of these, we should absolutely care. Uh, Acutely about the most vulnerable people in our world, and that is especially then our cisgender siblings and our transgender siblings and our transgender children. We should care deeply about that. And so we should ask the question, what is causing such a high suicide rate? And all the data that I've seen, all the studies that have been put forth, the legitimate ones, have supported the argument that the strongest correlation between suicidal ideation and transgender youth is the social stigma, the discrimination, the things that the walls we have put up in our society to between them and understanding themselves and learning about themselves. So, as a pastor, let me just make a suggestion about what we as the church could do. We could just use the pronouns that our children ask us to use. What if we do that? If we're so confident about gender, then we should trust that if this person is indeed confused and trying to work through their identity, then they will figure it out eventually if we provide a hospitable and loving place for them to do that. And if we're sure that they're wrong, we can still provide a space by using the pronouns they want, by welcoming them into that, inviting them to consider, rather than enforcing a social norm about their gender that's passed down from someone else or that's determined by their biology or what we assume their biology to teach us. So we could provide a space where we invite them to think, and we open again a social environment that's governed by love and acceptance, and see what happens from there. Because the alternative clearly is not working. The decision to dig our heels in and enforce our social norms is not working. It's alienating parents from their children. It's creating, as we talked about, very high suicide rates and suicidal ideation and other mental health issues among transgender youth. What if we just trusted in God and love to allow for this? And I think this is an important thing to say too. As Christians, we should be very aware that change in transition and moving from one thing to another is not a problem in theology. In fact, it's indigenous to it. It's part of the Christian story. Human beings change. That is our theological anthropology. And gender does not need to be night and day. In fact, even night and day are not night and day. We have things like sunsets and dawn and dusk. We have all kinds of other ways of looking at this. It's never just night or day. It's always different things. If someone says good morning, we don't correct them because they're not using day or night. Same with gender. I don't think we should correct people if we don't think if they're saying their gender in a different way than we would want. I think what we will discover is that we are creating a more loving and hospitable place. We are never as sure as we think we are. I mean, just not that long ago, throughout many churches in the United States, they were sure that there was an ontological, a very real difference between black and white people, and many Christians believed that the Bible taught that they should be segregated from each other. We were wrong. We were wrong. And we've learned that now. And so we might have been wrong about gender and sexuality for a very long time, and we might be learning now to embrace that and to apologize for it. So that's my perspective as a pastor. I hope it's helpful, and I hope that as parents and as caregivers in churches, that we find a way to create a social and relational environment that is loving, governed by love, and not by our own certitude. So I hope that you're able to find some help from this, wrestle with it, and I hope that you have a blessed day. Have a great one. Bye.